Hello, my name is Connor Hayes. I'm 32 years old, a former Marine, now a senior security specialist at a private firm that protects VIPs in California. My life, if I had to describe it, is like a rocky path. Never easy, but I've grown used to walking it. I'm not the type to talk much about myself, but since you're here, I suppose I'll share a bit about my story, my family, and the cracks that pulled us apart before everything exploded at a wedding I'll never forget. I grew up in a sprawling mansion in the suburbs of Los Angeles, where palm trees swayed under the golden sunlight, and the distant sound of ocean waves echoed like an endless whisper. It sounds idyllic, but inside that house the air was always heavy. My father, Stephen Hayes, now in his 60s, is the kind of man you'd call successful from the outside. He's the chairman of a solar and wind energy corporation, one of the big names in California. He's wealthy, powerful, and always proud of it. But to me, he's a stone wall, cold, strict, and never satisfied. He's conservative, always putting reputation and success above everything, even his family's emotions. To him, I was never good enough. My mother, Margaret, is the complete opposite. She's a gentle woman, always trying to smooth over the arguments in our house. She's like a cool breeze in the desert, but sometimes I see sadness in her eyes, as if she's given up on changing her stubborn husband. She's always stood on the line trying to keep our family from falling apart, even though I know it exhausts her. Then there's Lucas, my younger brother, 4 years my junior. He's the golden son my father always calls his pride. Lucas is the kind of person the media loves, young, talented, and ambitious. He runs a tech startup hailed by major publications as Silicon Valley's rising star. When we were kids, Lucas and I were inseparable, like two sides of the same coin. We'd run around on the beach, steal cookies from the kitchen, and laugh until Mom had to pretend to scold us to quiet down. But as we grew up, things changed. Lucas became the son my father wanted. Smart, eloquent, and skilled at pleasing the elite. Me? I took a different path. I never wanted to sit in a fancy office or wear a suit to sign million-dollar deals. I chose the military, where I learned how to face danger, stay calm when everything falls apart, and protect those who need me. After leaving the service, I transitioned to private security. My job isn't glamorous. Sometimes it's standing guard all night. Sometimes it's escorting a CEO through a mob of reporters. But I love it. I love the feeling that I can make a difference, even in small moments. To my father, though, I'm a failure. He calls me a lowly soldier, a penniless guard with no future. Every time we meet, he finds a way to remind me I've taken the wrong path. Our arguments usually end with me walking away while he shouts that I'm a disgrace to the family. I've learned not to care, or at least I try to. Deep down, his words still cut like a knife. My relationship with Lucas isn't much better. When he was little, he looked up to me, following me around like a shadow. But as he grew up and found success, the gap between us widened. He's busy with cocktail parties, handshakes with the elite, and glowing media profiles. I don't blame him. Lucas is just living the life he chose. But every time we meet, I feel the distance. Our conversations are short, awkward, as if an invisible wall stands between us. Then one day, I received Lucas's wedding invitation. He was marrying Isabella Morton, the daughter of a family as wealthy as ours, if not more famous, since her family is in the media and entertainment business. The wedding was planned at a 5-star resort in Malibu, where every square meter screamed luxury. According to my mother, the guest list would include California's most powerful people, business tycoons, Hollywood stars, and politicians. I held the invitation in my hand, staring at the gold-embossed lettering, and felt a wave of unease rising inside me. I didn't want to go. The thought of standing among that lavish crowd, hearing my father mock my job, or watching Lucas shine without even noticing his older brother made me want to toss the invitation in the trash. But then my mother called. Her voice was gentle as always, but I could hear the plea in it. "Connor, you have to come," she said. "This is your brother's big day. The family needs to be together, even just this once." I wanted to refuse, to say I didn't belong there. But the thought of my mother's eyes, even just in my imagination, made it impossible to say no. I sighed, folded the invitation, and tucked it into my pocket. "All right, Mom, I'll go." In the days leading up to the wedding, I tried to prepare myself mentally. I knew I'd face scrutinizing stares, whispers behind my back, and probably another argument with my father. But I told myself just one day I could handle it. I had no idea that day would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire Hayes family. I drove my old beat-up pickup truck along the winding coastal road of Malibu, where the late afternoon sun cast golden streaks across the ocean's surface. My truck, with its scratched silver paint and engine grumbling like a cranky old man, looked out of place among the gleaming supercars heading toward the five-star resort. Ferraris, Bentleys, and Rolls-Royces glided past, each one flaunting the wealth of its owner. I didn't care much, but I couldn't deny the feeling of being an outsider in this world. Tonight was the rehearsal dinner, the event before Lucas and Isabella's official wedding day. Mom had said it would be an intimate gathering, but as I pulled up to the resort's entrance, I realized intimate, in the Hayes and Morton family's dictionary, was nothing like mine. The entrance was adorned with pristine white flower garlands, and twinkling lights illuminated the sleek glass walls. I stopped the truck, handed my keys to the valet, and didn't miss the curious glance he shot at my vehicle. I just shrugged and walked inside. The main hall was dripping with opulence. Men in polished tuxedos, women in glittering evening gowns adorned with sparkling jewelry, and the lively hum of laughter mixed with the clink of wine glasses filled the air. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the fragrance of white orchids arranged everywhere. This wasn't just a party. It was a display of power and prestige. I scanned the room, recognizing a few faces from business and entertainment headlines. The bride's family, the Mortons, were in the media and entertainment industry, so it was no surprise to see a few reporters lingering near the entrance, cameras flashing alongside some Hollywood actors posing with radiant smiles. An actress I recognized from a blockbuster action movie was chatting animatedly with a group of guests, her sequined dress shimmering like starlight. I wore a simple black suit, not the tailored kind everyone else seemed to have. I had no intention of blending into this crowd, but the sense of being out of place kept creeping in. Mom spotted me from across the room, her smile like a cool breeze in this stifling atmosphere. She walked over dressed in a pale blue silk gown and gently hugged me. "Connor, you made it," she said, her voice warm but tinged with a hint of worry in her eyes. "I was afraid you'd change your mind." "I promised you, didn't I?" I replied, forcing a smile. "I wouldn't miss it." She took my hand and led me deeper into the hall. I could feel eyes glancing my way, some curious, some indifferent. I was no stranger to the way people looked at me, like I was a misfit in a room full of priceless antiques. Dad stood not far away, shaking hands with a silver-haired man in his 50s. I recognized him, Richard Morton, the bride's father, a media mogul. When Dad saw me, his gaze froze, cold as ice. "Connor," he said with a curt nod, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I nodded back, saying nothing. I was used to his coldness, but each time it still stung my chest. Mom pulled me toward a corner of the hall where Lucas stood with Isabella. My brother looked like he'd stepped out of a perfect painting. His suit probably cost more than my monthly salary, and his radiant smile seemed rehearsed to charm everyone. Isabella, the bride-to-be, was stunning, like a princess from a fairy tale. Her white evening gown hugged her figure, exuding elegance, and her eyes sparkled as she greeted guests. They were the perfect couple. No one could deny that. "Lucas," Mom called softly, "your brother's here." Lucas turned, his smile faltering for a split second when he saw me. "Connor," he said, his tone neither cold nor warm. "You made it." "Congrats," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Your bride looks amazing." Isabella smiled, tilting her head politely. "Thank you, Connor. It's great to meet you." I nodded, unsure what else to say. Lucas patted my shoulder, a quick, fleeting touch, before being whisked away by another group of guests. I stood there, watching my brother blend into the crowd like a shining star in the night sky. I wasn't jealous, but the feeling of being left behind weighed heavy on my heart. Mom led me to the dinner table, and I quickly realized I'd been seated at a far corner away from the center of attention. My table was filled with lesser-known guests, distant relatives, and a few lower-level employees of Dad's or the Mortons companies. I didn't complain, but the sense of being an outsider grew stronger. From my seat, I could see Lucas and Isabella at the main table, surrounded by powerful figures, their laughter echoing through the hall. Dad stood nearby, raising a glass of wine to deliver the welcome speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed with authority, "thank you all for joining us to celebrate this joyous occasion with the Hayes and Morton families. Today marks a special moment, the union of two families, and I am immensely proud of my son Lucas, who has achieved great things." The crowd applauded, and I saw Lucas smile, bowing his head in gratitude. Dad continued, his voice lowering as his eyes flicked toward me. "And this is my eldest son, Connor. He works as a security guard, hardly worth mentioning." A few guests chuckled. I felt eyes turn toward me, laced with curiosity and pity. Dad went on as if I didn't exist, shifting to praise Isabella and the Morton family. I gripped my wine glass tightly, forcing my face to stay calm. Mom, sitting beside me, placed a hand on my arm as if to comfort me. I shook my head slightly, signaling I was fine. But I wasn't. Dad's words, though not new, cut deep like a knife. I knew he was deliberately belittling me, as if acknowledging me as his son embarrassed him. I took a sip of wine, trying to focus on the food in front of me, but my eyes began scanning the room, observing. It was a habit honed from years in the military and security work. I couldn't sit still without noticing small details. And tonight, something felt off. A waiter in a black uniform stood near the main table, but his eyes didn't match those of a typical server. He scanned the room too quickly, too alertly, as if searching for something. Another man, also in uniform, hurried through the service area with quick steps, carrying an empty tray but bringing nothing out. I frowned, telling myself I might be overreacting. This was my brother's wedding event, not a security mission. I didn't want to stir things up over a hunch. But the hunch wouldn't leave. I kept watching and noticed another person. A woman near the entrance, pretending to polish glasses but repeatedly glancing toward the main table. Something was wrong, but I tried to push the suspicions aside. I sighed, telling myself I was probably just tense from the atmosphere. I glanced at Mom, who was chatting with an older woman, her smile as gentle as ever. The dinner dragged on late into the night with speeches, handshakes, and toasts. Lucas and Isabella moved from table to table, smiling and mingling. I only saw Lucas once more when he passed by my table. "Everything okay, bro?" he asked, but his eyes were already on another group of guests. "Fine," I replied curtly. He nodded and disappeared into the crowd. As the dinner ended, I stood up, feeling like I'd just survived an invisible battle. Mom hugged me again before I left, whispering, "Thank you for being here, Connor. Tomorrow will be better, I promise." I smiled, but deep down I knew tomorrow wouldn't be easier. I walked out to the parking lot where the red and blue lights of a patrol car flashed briefly, and that uneasy feeling stirred again. Something was brewing, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. But for tonight, I just wanted to get back to my room, lie down, and brace myself for the wedding day, a day I never imagined would turn into a nightmare. The morning sun in Malibu streamed through the hotel room window, as if reminding me that today was a big day. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie, trying to look more put together than I felt. The black suit I wore was the same simple one, nowhere near the expensive tuxedos the other guests would be wearing. I sighed, telling myself I wasn't here to compete with them. I was here for Lucas, for Mom, and for the promise I made to myself that I wouldn't let Dad or anyone else make me feel inferior. As I drove my pickup truck to the resort, the sight before me nearly took my breath away. The wedding venue was decorated like a real-life palace. White silk ribbons fluttered in the breeze, Orchids and white roses covered the pathway leading to the outdoor ceremony platform, with the blue ocean as a backdrop. The reception tables were exquisitely set, with sparkling wine glasses and tablecloths embroidered with gold thread. The parking lot was now filled with supercars, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and even a sleek Bugatti Chiron that I guessed was worth a few $1,000,000. Guests stepped out of these cars, men in tailored tuxedos, women stunning in evening gowns, their jewelry glittering with diamonds and their watches gleaming. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a statement of power and wealth. Reporters and journalists gathered outside the resort's entrance, cameras flashing incessantly, microphones raised to interview prominent guests. I recognized a few faces from Hollywood, a music star beaming at the press and a politician trying to dodge the cameras. The Mortons, with their media and entertainment empire, had undoubtedly turned this wedding into the event of the year. I slipped through the crowd, trying not to draw attention, and entered the ceremony area. The wedding took place outdoors under the radiant golden sun and the gentle sound of waves crashing. Isabella emerged in a pristine white wedding gown, radiant like a fairy tale princess. Lucas, standing beside her, looked like a prince in his flawless black tuxedo. They exchanged loving glances, and for a moment I almost forgot the distance between me and my brother. But then I saw Dad, standing in the front row, his proud smile directed at Lucas, and I knew I was still just a shadow in his eyes. After the ceremony, the guests moved to the evening reception hall, a vast space with a glass ceiling that let the moonlight and stars twinkle above. The round tables were draped in silk, adorned with towering floral centerpieces, and the light from crystal chandeliers made the room glow. I was seated at a table far from the center again, but this time I didn't mind. I was used to being pushed to the sidelines. Mom sat beside me trying to make conversation, but I could tell she was anxious, her eyes constantly darting toward Dad and Lucas. The dinner began with extravagant dishes, lobster, foie gras, and endless pours of expensive wine. Laughter and chatter mingled with the music from a live orchestra. Then Lucas stood up, raising his glass, and the hall fell silent, all eyes turning to him. His smile was radiant, confident, as if he was born to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas began, his voice carrying through the microphone. "Thank you all for being here to share this special day with Isabella and me. Today is not only about our marriage, but also an opportunity for us to create unforgettable moments together." The crowd applauded, some whistling in excitement. Lucas continued, his gaze sweeping the room, but I noticed he didn't look my way. "To make the evening more exciting, we'd like to invite everyone to participate in a special game. Each guest, if you wish, please bring the most valuable piece of jewelry you're wearing to the reception table. An appraiser will evaluate each item's worth, and the owner of the most valuable piece will receive a unique prize, a rare painting from the Hayes family collection, worth millions of dollars." The hall erupted in murmurs of excitement. I frowned, the unease from last night resurfacing. The idea sounded flashy, very much like Lucas, always eager to impress a crowd. But to me, someone in the security business, this game had too many red flags. Who would ensure the safety of jewelry worth millions? Who was overseeing the appraisal process? And why publicly announce the value of each piece in front of everyone? It wasn't just showing off, it was inviting trouble. I scanned the room, watching guests eagerly remove rings, necklaces, and watches. A middle-aged man wearing a diamond-encrusted Rolex laughed loudly as he handed his piece to a staff member near the reception table. A woman in a vibrant red dress removed her sparkling diamond earrings, passing them to a man in a black suit introduced as the appraiser. I studied him closely. He was about 50 with salt and pepper hair and a polite smile that felt oddly insincere. The way he handled the jewelry, scribbling in a notebook and conferring with the staff, made me uneasy. He was too polished, like he was playing a part. I took a sip of wine, trying to stay calm. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. But then I noticed a few staff members, dressed in black uniforms, moving between tables, who didn't act like typical event staff. One, a tall man with short hair, kept glancing toward the reception table, his eyes sharp and cold. Another pushing a food cart passed through the service area too frequently, as if checking something. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. This was my brother's wedding, not a mission. But my instincts, honed from years in the military, were screaming that something was wrong. Mom noticed my tension and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay, Connor?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, but my eyes stayed on the appraiser. He had just received a diamond ring from a female guest, smiling and jotting something in his notebook. But I noticed his hand moved too quickly, as if hiding something. I glanced at Lucas standing beside Isabella, both beaming as the crowd cheered for the game. But something in Lucas's smile unsettled me. It wasn't the joyful grin of a groom. It was more like the smile of someone hiding something. I told myself I was probably imagining things. Lucas was my brother, and despite our distance, I didn't want to believe he could be involved in anything shady. I took a sip of wine, trying to keep my expression calm, but my eyes stayed locked on a tall, short-haired man in a service staff uniform standing near a side door. He glanced at the appraiser, gave a subtle nod, then turned and quickly walked toward the service area. Something about his movements, too cautious, too purposeful, made me stand up. I pretended to head for a drink refill, but in reality I was following him. I weaved through the crowd, careful not to draw attention. The guests around me were laughing and chatting, oblivious to me or the man. I saw him disappear behind a door leading to the service area where staff prepared food and drinks. I paused for a second, checking if anyone was watching, then gently pushed the door open and slipped inside. The narrow hallway was filled with food carts and stacks of beverage crates. The air carried the scent of grease and wine. I heard hushed voices coming from a corner near the loading dock. Crouching low, I moved along the wall, careful not to make a sound. My heart pounded, but I kept my breathing steady, a skill honed from my military days when every step could mean the difference between life and death. I stopped behind a stack of wine crates, close enough to hear the conversation clearly but hidden from view. The low, urgent voice of the short-haired man spoke. "Once we've collected enough, we'll smuggle it out the back door. Today's haul is estimated at over $300 million. Top-tier stuff, watches, diamond rings, necklaces." Another voice, quieter but sharp, replied, "No mistakes. The truck's ready in the parking lot. Just get the goods out and we'll be gone before anyone notices." My heart seemed to stop. $300 million. The jewelry the guests were eagerly handing over wasn't for some flashy game. It was the target of a meticulously planned heist. I clenched my fists, trying to process it all. This was no longer a hunch. This was real, and I had to act now. I backed away carefully, avoiding any noise, and slipped out of the service area. Back in the main hall, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Jake, an old military buddy now working freelance security in the area. "Jake, need urgent backup. Planned heist at the Malibu resort. Call in more guys, monitor all exits, especially the back door and parking lot. I'll explain later." Jake replied almost instantly. "Got it. I'm bringing 3 guys. We'll be there in 15 minutes. What else do you need?" "Pose as a delivery worker. Get to the loading area. I'll send more details." I texted back, then pocketed my phone. I needed to alert the resort's head of security, but I also needed more concrete evidence to convince them to act. If I was wrong, I could ruin Lucas's wedding. But if I was right and did nothing, hundreds of millions of dollars and the safety of the guests would be at risk. I returned to the hall, trying to keep my face neutral. Lucas and Isabella were still mingling, shaking hands with guests, their perfect smiles unwavering. I glanced at the reception table where the appraiser was examining a Patek Philippe watch, pretending to inspect it before scribbling in his notebook. I noticed a small black box on the table where he placed the appraised jewelry. That could be where they were stashing the items before smuggling them out. I needed to act fast but discreetly. I walked past the reception table, pretending to drop a napkin, and bent down to pick it up. In that moment, I slipped a tiny tracking device. something I always carried in my pocket from my security days, onto the inside of the largest jewelry box on the table. The device, no bigger than a coin, could send precise GPS signals to my phone. I did the same with 2 other boxes, careful not to be noticed. With each passing second, adrenaline surged through me like I was back in a military operation. Done. I stood up, flashed a smile at a nearby staff member to deflect suspicion, and headed straight to the resort's security office. The head of security, a middle-aged man named Carl, was sitting in the surveillance room watching camera feeds. I knocked, stepped inside, and got straight to the point. "Carl, I'm Connor Hayes, private security. I just overheard a conversation in the service area. There's a group planning to steal all the jewelry from the groom's game. They're smuggling it out the back door, estimated at $300 million. Carl frowned, clearly skeptical. "You sure about this? This is the Hayes-Morton wedding. Who dare pull something here?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I saw them exchanging signals. I've also planted trackers on some of the jewelry boxes. You need to check the cameras at the back door and parking lot now." Carl hesitated, but my resolute stare made him nod. "All right, I'll alert my team. But if you're wrong, you're taking the heat." "I understand," I said, then returned to the hall. I needed to keep things under control until Jake and his team arrived. I sent another text to Jake asking one of his guys to pose as a delivery worker to get close to the loading area. My goal was clear: catch the thieves in the act as they tried to move the goods. If I could stop them before they left the resort, I'd save the guests' assets, and maybe my family's reputation. Back in the hall, I sat next to Mom, trying to look normal. She sensed my tension and placed a hand on my arm. "Are you okay, Connor? You seem so stressed." "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, but my eyes stayed on the appraiser. He'd just received a pearl-encrusted necklace from a female guest, smiling and jotting something down, but I noticed his hand moved too quickly, as if swapping something. I checked my phone. The tracker's signals were still steady in the hall, but I knew they'd be moved soon. I glanced at Lucas raising a glass in a toast with Isabella. His smile was still perfect, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something. The thought stabbed at my heart. Lucas was my brother. I didn't want to believe he could be involved in anything shady, but I'd learned in my line of work that there's no room for emotions, only the truth, and I was determined to find it. I sent one last text to Jake. "Be ready. When the goods move to the back door, follow them. Don't let them get away." Then I sat back, took a deep breath, and braced myself for what was coming. The hall was still buzzing with cheer, but in my mind, a battle had already begun. The live orchestra's music floated through the air, soft, but not enough to calm the storm raging in my head. The elite guests continued laughing and clinking their wine glasses, completely unaware that just outside the banquet hall, a heist worth hundreds of millions of dollars was unfolding. I sat at my table, my eyes fixed on the appraiser scribbling at the reception table. He had just received a sparkling diamond ring from a female guest, his smooth smile unwavering. But I knew that behind that smile was a sinister plan. I checked my phone. The signals from the tracking devices I'd planted on the jewelry boxes were still steady, but they were starting to move, slowly, toward the side door leading to the service area. My heart pounded. This was it. I glanced at Mom, who was chatting with an older woman, her smile gentle but her eyes filled with worry. I wanted to say something to reassure her, but I couldn't. Every second was critical now. I stood up, pretending to grab another drink, but in reality I moved closer to the side door. From this angle, I had a clearer view of the service staff. The tall, short-haired man I'd noticed earlier emerged from the service area, carrying a large black box, one I'd tagged with a tracker. He moved quickly, his eyes darting around, clearly trying to avoid attention. I pulled out my phone and texted Jake. "Large black box heading to the back door. Follow now." Jake replied instantly. "Got it. Team's ready. Cops are on the perimeter, ready to move in." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Everything needed to be timed perfectly. If I acted too soon, the thieves might catch on and escape. If I delayed, they'd vanish with $300 million in jewelry. I weaved through the crowd, keeping my distance from the short-haired man, and watched him push through the back door, disappearing outside. I signaled Carl, the resort's head of security, who was standing near the main exit. He nodded understanding and began speaking into his radio to coordinate with his team. I slipped out through another side door, avoiding the server's eyes. The cool night air hit me, laced with the salty scent of the ocean and the distant sound of waves. But I had no time to enjoy it. The parking lot behind the resort was brightly lit, and I spotted the short-haired man handing the large box to another man in a black jacket, standing next to a white van. A third man, likely the driver, sat in the cabin, the engine already running. I texted Jake. "White van, back parking lot, 3 guys, move now." Jake responded, "In position. Cops are 200 meters out. Where are you?" "Near the back door. I'll block them if they try to run," I texted back, then pocketed my phone. I moved quickly, crouching behind a row of luxury cars to observe. The short-haired man and the guy in the black jacket swiftly loaded 2 more large boxes into the van. They worked with the precision of professionals, wasting no time. I knew time was running out. Suddenly, a loud noise erupted from the parking lot. Police sirens. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, and I saw the driver in the cabin flinch, turning to look toward the lights. "Go!" he shouted, and the van's wheels began to roll, tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted to my pickup truck, parked in a corner of the lot, and jumped into the driver's seat. The engine roared as I floored the gas, chasing the van as it sped toward the resort's back gate. Jake and his team, along with the police, appeared from both sides, blocking the main exits. But the driver didn't stop. He swerved, trying to squeeze through a narrow gap between 2 supercars, a red Ferrari and a silver Rolls-Royce. A piercing screech of metal rang out as the van clipped the Ferrari, sending it spinning into the Rolls-Royce. Guests nearby started screaming, and the parking lot descended into chaos. I pressed the gas, maneuvering my old pickup through the crowd, weaving past the now scratched and dented luxury cars. I didn't care about them. My focus was the van. The driver, realizing he was boxed in, veered onto a side road leading to the beach. But I'd anticipated this. I accelerated, cutting in front of the van, and yanked the wheel, positioning my pickup to block the road. The tires squealed, and a jarring impact jolted me forward, the seatbelt digging into my chest. The van came to a stop, its nose inches from my truck. Police and Jake's team swarmed in seconds later, guns pointed at the cabin. "Get out! Hands up!" an officer shouted. The driver, pale-faced, raised his hands in surrender and stepped out. The short-haired man and the guy in the black jacket were dragged out of the van's back, handcuffed on the spot. I stepped out of my truck, quickly checking myself for injuries, then looked into the van's cargo area. The jewelry boxes, including the ones I'd tagged, were scattered inside. Jake clapped me on the shoulder, a half smile on his face. "Haven't seen you move like that in a while. Like we're back in the service." "Thanks for the backup, but it's not over yet," I replied, my eyes still on the handcuffed thieves. The police began inspecting the van, opening the boxes and confirming the jewelry inside. I let out a breath, knowing the guests' assets were safe at least. But then an officer, checking the short-haired man's phone, frowned and called me over. "Hayes, you need to see this," he said, handing me the phone. I scrolled through the screen and my heart seemed to stop. It was a chain of texts between the short-haired man and a contact labeled LH. The messages were clear. "Make sure everything's set before 10. I'll keep the crowd busy with the game. You'll get 30% after it's done. LH Lucas Hayes, my brother's name." My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was staring me in the face, clear as day. Lucas, the groom, the pride of our family, was connected to this heist. "You know this person?" the officer asked, his tone grave. I nodded, my voice hoarse. "That's my brother." The officer said nothing more, just signaled his team to continue the search. I stood there amidst the chaotic parking lot with guests' screams and police sirens echoing around me. The luxury cars, symbols of wealth, were now dented and scratched, a testament to the night's unraveling. I looked toward the banquet hall where Lucas still stood, unaware that everything was about to collapse. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. I'd stopped the heist, but the cost might be greater than I'd imagined. I knew I had to return to the hall, confront Lucas, confront Dad, and face the truth no one in my family wanted to acknowledge. But for now I stood there, caught in the whirlwind of flashing red and blue lights, my heart heavy as lead. A police officer, the one who had shown me the phone, patted my shoulder. "Hayes, we need you back in the hall. There are some things we need to clear up." I nodded, though my feet felt rooted to the ground. I knew what was waiting. Not just exposing the heist, but the truth about Lucas, about my family, and maybe about myself. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the wave of emotion surging within me, and followed the officer back to the banquet hall. Inside, the atmosphere was still lively, as if the chaos outside hadn't touched it. The music played on, the crystal chandeliers sparkled, and the elite guests continued laughing and clinking their wine glasses. At the reception table, the appraiser was still at work, holding a pearl necklace, pretending to examine it before jotting something in his notebook. I looked at him, and this time I saw the tension in his eyes. He knew things were falling apart. The officer walked ahead carrying a large box, one of the ones I'd tagged with a tracker, now filled with the real jewelry recovered from the van. I followed, feeling the curious stares of the guests as we entered. The officer signaled the security team to block the exits, ensuring no one could leave the hall until everything was resolved. The music abruptly stopped, and the room fell silent, all eyes turning toward us. The officer placed the box on the reception table and opened it, revealing the glittering jewelry, diamond rings, gold watches, gem-encrusted necklaces. The hall erupted in gasps, murmurs rippling through the crowd like waves. A few guests stepped closer, recognizing their own items. A woman in a red dress gasped, "That's my ring, why is it there?" The appraiser went pale, his hands trembling as he tried to close his notebook. The officer, his voice firm, pointed at him. "You, stay where you are. Explain now, where did this jewelry come from and why isn't it still at your table?" The hall fell deathly quiet. I saw Mom sitting not far away, clutching her hands, her eyes filled with confusion. Dad stood near the main table, his face flushed, but he said nothing yet. Lucas and Isabella were in the center of the hall, their smiles gone. Lucas looked at me, and for a moment I saw fear flash in his eyes. The appraiser stammered, his voice shaky. I don't know, I was just following orders from the organizers." "Whose orders?" the officer snapped, stepping closer. "Speak clearly or you'll be cuffed right now." Under pressure, the man broke into a sweat, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Then he pointed at Lucas. "Him, Lucas Hayes. He hired me. I was paid to organize this game, to use fake jewelry to swap out the real stuff and smuggle it out through the back door." The hall exploded. Shouts, whispers, and the sound of chairs shifting filled the air. Guests looked at each other, then at Lucas, their eyes brimming with shock and outrage. Isabella grabbed Lucas's hand, but he pulled away, stepping forward, his face pale. "That's a misunderstanding," Lucas shouted, his voice trembling but trying to sound confident. "I don't know anything about this. He's lying." I stood there, my heart constricting. Part of me wanted to believe Lucas, to believe my brother couldn't do this. But the text messages from the thief's phone burned in my mind, sharp as a knife. Dad stepped forward, his voice like thunder. "Enough!" He turned to the officer, pointing at me. "This is a plot by my eldest son. He's jealous of Lucas, jealous of his brother's success. He fabricated this to ruin our family." His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I met his gaze, unflinching, but said nothing. I was used to Dad blaming me, to being seen as the failure, but this time I couldn't stay silent. "Dad," I said, my voice low but firm, "I didn't fabricate anything. I was just doing my job, protecting the people in this room." The officer raised a hand, signaling for silence. "We have evidence," he said, then turned to a colleague. "Bring him in." The hall's doors opened and the short-haired man, one of the thieves caught in the parking lot, was led in, hands cuffed. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact, but when the officer questioned him, his voice was clear and unwavering. Lucas Hayes hired us. He said we'd get 30% of the haul after the job was done. He needed the money to pay off debts. The hall erupted again. Isabella covered her mouth, her eyes wide, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Dad stood frozen, his fists clenched, as if unable to believe what he'd heard. Lucas stepped back, shaking his head repeatedly. "No, that's not true. He's lying. I didn't..." But before Lucas could finish, the officer held up the short-haired man's phone, displaying the screen for all to see. The name LH and the cold, incriminating messages were clear. Lucas stared at the screen, and I saw his expression shift, from panic to despair. He bowed his head, his shoulders slumping, and in that moment I knew he had no defense left. I had no choice," Lucas whispered, his voice breaking. "I owed the mafia a fortune. If Dad found out, he'd cut me off, call me a failure. I just wanted to keep up appearances, to hold on to everything I'd built." Lucas's confession was the final blow, slicing through the opulent atmosphere of the banquet hall. Just minutes ago, the room had been aglow with crystal chandeliers filled with lively chatter and the clinking of wine glasses. Now it was suffocated by a deafening silence, broken only by stifled sobs and stunned, outraged stares. I stood there watching my brother being handcuffed, his eyes lowered as if trying to hide from the world. But no one could escape the truth, not now. My mother, Margaret, covered her face, her shoulders trembling with each sob. Her quiet cries pierced my heart. She had always been the one trying to hold our family together, the one standing in the middle to mediate our fights. But now, she was just a broken mother, watching the son she loved crumble in front of hundreds of people. I wanted to step forward to hold her and tell her everything would be okay, but I knew that would be a lie. Nothing could be okay after this. My father, Stephen, stood motionless like a stone statue. His hands trembled, clenched tightly, but his eyes, always full of pride and authority, were now empty. I saw him take a deep breath, as if trying to swallow the truth. Lucas, his pride and joy, the one he'd always praised as the future of the Hayes family, had just admitted to being a fraud, someone who conspired with criminals to steal from the very guests at his own wedding. I knew Dad didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was undeniable, and he had no choice but to face it. On the bride's side, the reaction was even more intense. Richard Morton, Isabella's father, shot up from the main table, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. He was a seasoned businessman who had built his media empire from nothing. I'd heard Dad talk about him, a man who never forgave betrayal. And now, in front of hundreds of peers, business partners, and the press lurking outside, he had been humiliated by the groom he'd once accepted. "Enough!" Richard roared, his voice echoing through the hall, startling several guests. He pointed at Lucas, his eyes sharp as knives. "He's a fraud. I won't let my daughter stay tied to this family for another second. Cancel the rest of the ceremony. I want a full investigation, and I'll make sure everyone involved pays the price." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some guests nodded in agreement, their eyes burning with indignation. Isabella, who had stood beside Lucas just minutes ago, stepped back, her eyes brimming with tears. She looked stunning, like a princess in her pristine white wedding gown, but her face was now a mask of shock and pain. She stared at Lucas, as if searching for the man she loved, the one she'd planned to spend her life with. But all she saw was a liar, someone who nearly made her the wife of a criminal. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she covered her mouth, trying to stifle her sobs. Isabella's mother, Eleanor Morton, rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "Let's go," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. She guided Isabella away from the main table, shielding her from the curious and judgmental stares of the crowd. Isabella didn't resist, following her mother silently, her head bowed as if she wanted to vanish from the room. but the strongest reaction came from Isabella's brother, Taylor Morton. I'd met Taylor a few times before, a tall, sharp man who had always been suspicious of Lucas. Now he stood up abruptly, slamming his hand on the table, causing a wine glass to tip over, spilling a red stain across the pristine white tablecloth. "I told you all from the start," Taylor bellowed, his voice like thunder. "I said he wasn't trustworthy, but no one listened. And now look, our entire family has been humiliated because of this bastard." Taylor signaled to two private security guards from the Morton family dressed in black suits, standing near the exit. They immediately moved forward, escorting Eleanor and Isabella out of the hall. Isabella glanced back one last time, her eyes lingering on Lucas, but there was no love left in her gaze, only disappointment and pain. The hall's doors closed behind them, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. The guests, business tycoons and the ultra-wealthy from both the Hayes and Morton sides, began to stand, the sound of chairs scraping filling the room. They were no longer friends, partners, or allies. Their eyes turned toward the Hayes family with contempt. A middle-aged man whom I recognized as one of Dad's major business partners approached the main table, pointing at my father. "Stephen, I trusted you. But now what? Your son's a criminal. I'm terminating all contracts with your corporation today." Another woman wearing a sparkling diamond necklace shouted, "I'll sue your entire family for nearly losing my property. This is an outrage." Similar accusations echoed throughout the hall, a tidal wave of fury that couldn't be stopped. I saw Dad clench his fists, trying to maintain a calm facade, but I knew he was shattering inside. His reputation, built over a lifetime, was crumbling before his eyes. The police got to work, bringing out the recovered jewelry boxes to return them to the guests. An officer stood by the reception table, calling out names and items, asking owners to sign for their property. The guests, though relieved to recover their belongings, couldn't hide their anger. Many grabbed their rings, watches, or necklaces and left immediately, refusing to look back at my family. The banquet hall, once vibrant and filled with laughter, grew emptier by the minute, leaving behind a heavy, humiliating atmosphere. I stood in a corner of the hall, watching the last guests leave, their eyes filled with contempt and disappointment. The banquet tables, once adorned with white orchids and silk linens, were now in disarray, with overturned wine glasses leaving red stains on the tablecloth. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled, but their light only highlighted the emptiness of the room. Outside, through the glass doors, the red and blue lights of police cars flashed relentlessly, a stark reminder that this nightmare was real. The resort was nearly deserted now. Only a few security guards, police officers finalizing their reports, and my family, or what was left of it, remained. Mom sat in a corner, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Her quiet cries cut into my heart. I wanted to go to her, to hold her and tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't. Nothing could be okay after what had just happened. Dad stood near the main table, motionless, his eyes hollow. He was no longer the powerful, controlling man I'd always known. He looked 10 years older, his hands clenched tightly as if trying to hold on to the last shred of his pride. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, he seemed small, vulnerable. But I didn't know what to say. Years of being belittled by him, called a lowly soldier, were still etched deep in my heart. Yet I felt no satisfaction. There was only a heavy sadness, as if our entire family had lost something irreplaceable. Lucas stood in the middle of the hall, hands cuffed, flanked by two police officers. His head was bowed, his once sleek hair now disheveled, his perfect tuxedo wrinkled. As the officers led him past us, he deliberately avoided our gazes. He didn't look at Mom, didn't look at Dad, and especially didn't look at me. I wanted to call his name, to ask why, to understand what had driven him to this point. But my throat tightened, and I just stood there, powerless, watching my brother being led out of the hall. Mom sobbed louder as Lucas disappeared behind the doors. I walked over, kneeling beside her, taking her hand. "Mom," I said, my voice hoarse, "I'm sorry." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're not to blame, Connor. You saved everyone, but I don't know how to face this." I squeezed her hand, trying to offer some strength, though I felt unsteady myself. I glanced at Dad, hoping he'd say something, do something to comfort Mom. But he just stood there, his eyes vacant, as if his soul had left his body. I stood up, intending to leave to give Mom some space, but then Dad's voice broke the silence, low and raspy. "Connor," he called, his tone for the first time that evening free of mockery or disdain. "Did you know beforehand?" I turned, meeting his gaze. His eyes weren't as cold as usual, they were weary, filled with regret. I took a deep breath and answered slowly, "No. But when I saw that game, I knew something was wrong and I couldn't ignore it." He fell silent, his lips pressed tightly together. I saw him open his mouth as if to say something, but his voice caught. "Thank you," he whispered, almost inaudible. It was the first time in my life I'd heard Dad thank me, but it brought no joy. There was only an empty feeling, as if everything between us had shattered long ago, and this thank you was just one final fragment. I nodded, saying nothing more. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The air felt heavy, the scent of wine and orchids now stifling. I walked out of the hall, leaving Mom and Dad in a mix of shame, gratitude, and regret. I knew Dad wouldn't easily forgive me, not because I'd done wrong, but because I'd exposed a truth he didn't want to face. But I had no regrets. I'd done what was right. Outside, the parking lot was still chaotic. Dented and scratched supercars were scattered about, evidence of the storm that had just swept through. The police were still working, taking notes and inspecting the scene. I saw Jake standing near my pickup truck, now dented on one side from the collision with the thieves' van. He clapped my shoulder, a half smile on his face. "You okay, Hayes?" That was like something out of an action movie. I tried to smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah, but I don't want to play the lead again." Jake nodded, understanding. "You did good. If it wasn't for you, they'd have gotten away with hundreds of millions." "Thanks," I said, my voice low. "But the cost, it's more than I expected." Jake didn't say anything else, just patted my shoulder again and walked off, leaving me with my thoughts. I looked out at the ocean where the moonlight reflected on the water, shimmering like the diamonds I'd just saved. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt exhausted, and a deep pain welled up as I thought of Lucas, Mom, Dad, and the family I once thought would last forever. I walked to my pickup, slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine. I just sat there, staring through the windshield, letting memories flood back. Of the days when Lucas and I were kids, running on the beach, laughing without a care. I wondered what had changed, what had pushed Lucas down this path, and why I hadn't seen it sooner. But I knew no answer would ease this pain. I took a deep breath, started the truck, and drove away. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to leave this place, the flashing red and blue lights, the wreckage of this day. But no matter how far I went, I knew I couldn't escape the truth, that my family was broken, and though I'd done the right thing, I couldn't save them. In the days following the wedding, the world seemed to explode with the story of Lucas Hayes and his dark scheme. Major newspapers, from the Los Angeles Times to the New York Post, ran screaming headlines. Millionaire groom plots $300 million heist at lavish wedding. Photos from the wedding, originally taken to showcase its grandeur, now flooded the internet, accompanied by detailed articles about the foiled robbery, the parking lot chase, and Lucas's confession in front of hundreds of elite guests. Reporters hunted for every detail, from the jewelry game to the dramatic pursuit, and the Hayes family, once a symbol of power and success, became the epicenter of humiliation. Lucas was detained immediately after that night, charged with conspiracy to commit grand theft and association with organized crime. I heard the police had expanded their investigation, tracing the text messages from the thief's phone to track down the mafia Lucas owed money to. The case helped them dismantle a larger criminal network, which might have reduced the immediate threat to Lucas's life. The mafia no longer had a reason to target him once their secrets were exposed. but in exchange, Lucas almost certainly faced years in prison. I didn't know whether that made me feel relieved or more heartbroken. He was my brother, but he had betrayed everyone. As expected, the Morton family swiftly cut all ties with ours. Within hours of the incident, they issued a press release stating that Isabella and her family had no knowledge of Lucas's plot and were shocked and devastated by his actions. The statement emphasized their cooperation with the police to uncover the truth, a move to protect their reputation with the media and business partners. I didn't blame them. Isabella, after all, was a victim, a bride who nearly married a fraud, humiliated in front of the world. My father, Stephen, took the hardest hit. His solar and wind energy corporation, his pride for years, was reeling from the scandal. Major partners, including some who attended the wedding, announced they were terminating contracts. The company's stock plummeted, losing nearly 20% of its value in just a few days. Longtime partners, people who once called him friend, stopped answering his calls. Mom told me Dad barely left his office, sitting there for hours, staring into space as if trying to salvage what was lost. But I knew it wasn't just about money or reputation for him. He had lost Lucas, the son he'd pinned all his hopes and pride on. Meanwhile, I unexpectedly became the media's focus. Articles dubbed me the reluctant hero, praising me for stopping the audacious heist, saving assets and possibly the lives of hundreds of VIP guests. One outlet even wrote, "Connor Hayes, former Marine, turned his brother's wedding into a battlefield and emerged victorious." I didn't feel like a hero. Every time I read those stories, I saw only Lucas with his head bowed, hands cuffed, and Mom's pained expression. My security firm quickly recognized the value of the story. They promoted me to Director of High-Profile Event Security, a role I never imagined taking on. They also invited me to speak at international conferences from Las Vegas to London, where I was asked to recount how I uncovered and stopped the heist. I agreed, not for the fame, but because I knew this work defined me. It gave me purpose, something I'd never found in Dad's expectations. But despite the praise and career advancement, I couldn't shake the emptiness. A week after the incident, I decided to visit Lucas in jail. I didn't know what I expected, an apology, an explanation, or just a chance to see my brother again. But when I arrived, the guard told me Lucas refused to see me. "He doesn't want to see anyone," the guard said coldly. I stood there in front of the cold iron door, a weight of regret pressing on my chest. I had saved everyone, but I had lost Lucas, not just because of him, but because I had exposed the truth. Back at my small apartment in the Los Angeles suburbs, I sat with a beer, looking out the window at the city lights twinkling like stars. I thought of Dad, of the look in his eyes when he whispered thank you in the banquet hall. I knew he understood I'd done the right thing, but the cost of the truth was too high. He lost Lucas, his reputation, and perhaps he still couldn't forgive me for being the one to reveal it all. The tension between us remained, an invisible wall that couldn't be broken. I'd called him a few times, but he didn't answer. Maybe he needed time. Maybe he'd never be ready. Mom was the only one I stayed in touch with. She called me every day, her voice frail but trying to sound strong. "You did the right thing, Connor," she said. "I'm proud of you." But I could hear the pain in her voice, and I knew she was struggling to come to terms with what happened. I tried to comfort her, but every conversation left me feeling helpless. Sitting alone in my apartment, I thought about everything. Lucas, Dad, the family that once meant everything to me. I realized that sometimes living for what's right doesn't lead to happiness. It's a lonely path where you face hatred, estrangement, and wounds that never heal. But I had no regrets. I did what I had to, not to prove myself to Dad or to bring Lucas down, but because I believed the truth, however painful, was the only thing worth protecting. If I could tell anyone anything, it would be this: live for what you believe is right, even if the cost is the resentment of those you love. Because in the end, you can only live with yourself, your choices, and the belief that you didn't turn your back on what's right. I stood up, turned off the light, and looked out at the night sky. Someday maybe Mom would find a way past this pain. Someday maybe Dad would look at me differently. And someday maybe Lucas would understand why I did what I did. But today it was just me, and I would keep moving forward no matter how rough the road ahead.